What's up, Nestors? It's the Russian dude. There is something deeply unsettling about how the Kremlin uses the word rehabilitation. It sounds soft, humane, almost even charitable. It evokes images of quiet sanatoriums, clean air, doctors in white coats, and people slowly recovering from trauma. But when Russia suddenly announces that hundreds of residents from Kursk and Belgorod, as well as soldiers from the front lines, are being quietly shipped across the border to Belarus for this recovery, you just have to ask a very simple question. Recovery from what, exactly? And more importantly, recovery for whose benefit? Because this story is not about care. It's not about compassion, and it's definitely not about helping ordinary people who found themselves living on the front line of Putin's war. This is a story about containment, about control, about removing inconvenient witnesses from Russian territory, hiding the consequences of the war from major cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, and then outsourcing both suffering and silence to a loyal ally who is more than happy to profit from both of it. Behind the soothing language of sanatoriums and rehabilitation programs lies a much darker reality, one where civilians and soldiers alike are quietly displaced, managed, and monetized in service of a collapsing narrative. Let's start with what we are actually being told. Russia's human rights ombudsman Tatyana Moskalkova proudly announces that the first group of 410 residents from Kursk and Belgorod regions have been already sent to Belarus. By the end of 2025, she said 770 people would have been undergoing sanatorium and resort treatment, in a neat list of Belarusian facilities, obviously. Names are even mentioned, numbers are provided, gratitude is expressed to the Belarusian leadership, everything looks orderly, benevolent, and well organized. Almost too clean, too suspicious. But just pause for a second. Kursk and Belgorod are Russian regions. If people living there are traumatized, injured, or in need of psychological or medical care, why are they being sent out of the country? Russia is not some kind of failed microstate without hospitals, doctors, or sanatoriums. It's a country that consistently boasts about its vast territory, resources, and self-sufficiency. So, why all of a sudden this need to export civilians and wounded people to Belarus? Like what, Russia with all its hospitals cannot accommodate several hundred people, or what? The answer becomes clearer once you understand what these people represent. Residents of Kursk and Belgorod are not just abstract statistics or regular people. They're living proof that the war has crossed back into Russia. They have seen the shelling, they have seen destruction, some have seen Russian military incompetence up close. Others have witnessed how local authorities abandoned them, delayed evacuations, cut payments, or simply disappeared when things got a little bit too dangerous. These are people who can talk, and that makes them absolutely dangerous. Sending them to Belarus removes them from Russian cities, from Russian journalists, and from Russian social media networks. It isolates them geographically and informationally. It keeps them out of cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg once again, where their stories might resonate the most. Rehabilitation, quote-unquote, in this context looks a lot less like healing and a lot more like quiet removal out of sight and out of mind. And what kind of stories will these people even spread, though? That's a very good question. Let's try to answer this in our next chapter. Now let's talk about the stories themselves. Because if these people stayed in Russia, especially if they ended up in major urban centers, the damage would be enormous. Not military damage, but the narrative one, the kind that the Kremlin fears the most. Residents of border regions do not talk about geopolitics, they do not argue about NATO expansion or historical grievances. No, they just talk about what they have seen, what they experienced, about the reality, about explosions at night, officers who showed up too late or not at all, promises of compensation that never arrived, soldiers passing through their towns who were drunk, angry, scared, violent, or all of these things at the same time. Checkpoints, searches, confiscations, and just the casual brutality of a system that no longer even pretends to protect its own people. And then there are soldiers themselves, because this rehabilitation program does not stop with only civilians. It extends to the so-called special military operation fighters and their families. Men who have seen frontline reality, Men who know exactly how recruitment works, how contracts are violated, how salaries are stolen, and how lives are treated as expendable. These are the people who know about beatings, humiliation, blackmail, and meat assault designed to produce only satisfactory reports to the chain, up to the chain of command and fill commanders' pockets. If you put these people on a train to Moscow and suddenly the war stops being abstract, suddenly it has now faces, voices, and details that do not fit into television slogans. And bad news spread fast, you know this, guys, much faster than good news. So just let a dozen of these people into the capital, and by the end of the next month it will be thousands who would have heard these stories. Millions even before the year ends. That is why Belarus is so perfect. It is so close enough, it is close enough to control, but far enough to silence. People are technically held, but practically removed from any space where their experiences could disrupt the carefully curated illusion that life in Russia remains normal, stable, and untouched by the war. But why even Belarus? Why it even needs these people? Don't they have enough of their own problems? What's the benefit for Belarus for housing these so-called refugees? Let's answer these questions in our next chapter. All of this brings us to Belarus itself, because none of this works unless someone on the other side is eager to play along. And guess what? Alexander Lukashenko's regime is not just willing, it is enthusiastic. For Belarus, this arrangement is a financial goldmine. Sanatoriums get filled, medical contracts get signed, transport services, logistics, food supply, staffing, everything gets paid for. And it's all paid for by Russian money. War money. Endless, bleeding war money. Belarus gets to reap the benefits without officially even being at war, without body bags coming home to Minsk, without public mobilization, and without even the political risks that Putin is drowning in. But it goes deeper than just tourism and medical services. Belarus's military-industrial complex has been running at full speed since the war began. I mean, we all know this guise who is one of the suppliers for the Russian military, right? Missiles, drones, vehicle repairs, ammunition storage, training facilities, all of this generates huge revenue. Housing Russian soldiers, rotating them through rehabilitation, hosting their families, it's all just a part of the same ecosystem. Suffering in Belarus and Russia is monetized, trauma is outsourced, and loyalty is rewarded in cash. Lukashenko does not need ideology here. He needs money, leverage, and convenience and continued relevance. Putin provides all three. And in return, Belarus provides silence, space, and services. It's just a perfect symbiosis between two regimes that understand each other way too well. One exports problems, the other invoices them. And if somebody even dares to ask questions, well, it's not like Lukashenko is unaware how to silence critics and dissent. Putin will not need to spend extra brain power how to teach him all those things. He can rely on him fully so that people receive exactly the same treatment as back home. Officially, all of this happens under the banner of the so-called union state between Russia and Belarus. Cooperation, brotherhood, shared responsibility. But in practice, what we are looking at is a system for managing reality itself. Notice how none of these Belarusian sanatoriums publicly report the arrival of these people. No pictures, no photos online, nothing. Notice how everything flows through ombudsmen, governors, and ministries, not independent organizations. Just also notice how the language is carefully sanitized. Recovery, recreation, assistance. Not a single mention of shelling, PTSD, failure, no mention of accountability, nothing. This is precisely how authoritarian systems adapt when lives become too fragile. They do not abandon propaganda, they supplement it with logistics. When you cannot fully control information, you just start controlling people instead. Move them, separate them, reframe their experiences, keep them busy with procedures, treatment schedules, paperwork, until exhaustion replaces anger, and these people no longer even believe themselves. They don't believe that they experienced something in the past. And for Russia, this strategy solves multiple problems at once. It reduces internal pressure, minimizes visible war consequences, it rewards a loyal ally, and also buys time. Time to keep recruiting, time to keep lying, time to keep pretending that what is happening in Kursk and Belgorod is an exception rather than a preview for what's coming. So no, this story is not about rehabilitation, it's about containment. It's about making sure that the human cost of Putin's war does not walk freely through Russian cities, does not talk too loudly, asking the wrong questions, or reminding others that the war is real and it is already home. Belarus did not open its doors out of kindness. It opened them for money. It opened them for leverage, survival without a collapsing regional order. And Russia did not send its people there out of care. It sent them there because silence is cheaper than truth, and distance is easier than accountability. As long as this war continues, more people will be quietly relocated, sanitized, and hidden behind this bureaucratic language. And each one of those rehabilitation programs now and in the future will serve exactly the same purpose. Not to heal the wounded, but to protect the lie. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more news like this. Happy weekend. If you want to support our work, the links down below. For example, you can become a Patreon member where there is an additional chapter at the end of each episode. The link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.